The black servant trope is a long-standing tradition in Hollywood, dating all the way back to the days before the most famous black servant.
Keep your shawl on your shoulder. I ain't even for you to get all freckled after buttermilk I done put on you all this winter.
Became the first black person to be awarded an Oscar.
And I want to thank each one of you who had a part in selecting me for one of the awards.
It's a tradition that's pretty much fallen out of favor now. One of the last major films to employ this tried and true formula was 2010's The Help, which launched the careers of Viola Davis, Octavia Spencer, Emma Stone, Jessica Chastain, and Bryce Dallas Howard. It's a film that hasn't been treated kindly with time, so much so that Viola Davis now says that she regrets participating in it. But in revisiting this bona fide classic, you become aware of a convention that had pretty much become the standard in Hollywood by the 2010s.
She looked like the winning horse at the Kentucky Derby.
If you're going to show a black person in a position of subservience, at least make them spicy.
I clean so Mrs. White folk won't chip any nail polish off her lily white hands.
I'm Dara Starr Tucker, and this is The Breakdown. One of the most popular films of my childhood, the film that launched Jessica Tandy and Morgan Freeman into superstardom, was a bit of a relic for its time. Driving Miss Daisy told the story of an elderly white woman in the Old South and the decades-long relationship that she had maintained with her driver, Hoke, played by Morgan Freeman. Now, I didn't see this film until much later. All I knew is that it was an Academy Award-winning film that was praised by critics at the time. When I finally sat down to watch it as an adult, I spent most of the film cringing. What was this? Why was I sitting here watching Morgan Freeman, of all people, be demeaned by this crotchety old woman?
Made me look like a fool. A GD fool.
Oh, Miss Daisy?
Was this supposed to be endearing? I found it infuriating.
Lord knows you ain't no fool.
Slow down.
But there did come a point where Morgan Freeman's character does something that had become endemic of these black servant characters by the late 80s. He fought back.
Now, how you think I feel having to sit up here and ask you, can I go make water, like I'm some child?
By this point, this kind of scene was almost a requirement in any film that depicted black servitude. It wasn't that people didn't want to see these stories, they just didn't want to see them done in the way that they had been done for so many years. Boomer and Jen Jones viewers wanted their black servants to have kick.
And I ain't just some back of the neck you look at while you going wherever you got to go.
They wanted these films and TV shows to characterize these black domestic workers as pushing back, show them standing up for themselves. They wanted to see the indignities that they had to face, show the ugliness, or at least show the cluelessness of their white overlords, and give the audience a window into how they dealt with those circumstances.
I'm a man. I'm about 70 years old, and I know when my bladder's full.
In the early days of motion pictures, servant roles were pretty much all that black actors and actresses could expect to play, no matter how talented they were. Actresses like Hattie McDaniel, Louise Beavers,
I just loves to work for you, Miss Lou.
and Juanita Moore solidified the black mammy stereotype into celluloid. Lillian Randolph made quite the living from embodying this caricature in It's a Wonderful Life and in 19 Tom and Jerry cartoons.
If you breaks one more thing, you is going out. O-W-T out.
Teresa Harris was a beautiful, talented black actress whose career may have rivaled any up-and-coming Hollywood ingenue if she had been given the chance to play anything other than maids and ladies' attendants. In Blossoms in the Dust, she was even required to perform in blackface because they didn't think she looked like a stereotypical maid. Bill Bojangles Robinson soft-shoed his way through a series of films with Shirley Temple where he played an affable attendant, ever willing to teach a few dance moves to the little girl that he was pleased to serve. With each of these films from the golden era of motion pictures, one thing is constant. We really don't know much about the inner lives of these characters. If they're unhappy with their role as a servant, we're unaware of it. We don't know what they do when they're not working. Annie in Imitation of Life works for Laura for 15 years before it even occurs to Laura to ask whether or not Annie might have friends.
All the friends I'd like to have there. It never occurred to me that you had any friends. You never have any visitors. I didn't know. Miss Laura, you've never asked.
These characters exist to nurture and provide comfort for the film's white protagonists. With the exception of the wisecracking Annie in It's a Wonderful Life,
I heard it's about time one of you lunkheads said it.
and of course the OG spicy servant,
And I ain't aiming for you to go to Mr. John Wilkinson's and eat like a field hand and gobble like a hog.
they would never be caught backtalking or challenging their employer's authority.
I know you're trying to do the best you can for Mars Tim. And I'm trying to do the best I can for him too, sir.
This was the black servitude of old in Hollywood's so-called golden age. As the boomers reached adulthood in the 70s, black people began to fill more prominent roles in television and film, but that didn't mean that black domestic workers went anywhere. The fact of the matter was, a lot of black boomers and so-called Generation Jones grew up with parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles who were themselves domestic workers. They knew this reality all too well. These were hardworking, blue-collar men and women who took the only kind of work that would have been available to them at the time. They weren't afforded a college education, but if they could get connected with the right kind of family or company, they could count on job security that would last a lifetime. They worked as butlers, maids, porters, drivers, and childcare workers for upper-middle-class and wealthy white families, and they put their children through school and gave them working-class and middle-class upbringings that would allow their children to pursue a higher education and white-collar employment. So seeing these stories depicted on film was empowering and relatable, both for black families that had lived that reality and for the white families who had employed them and considered many of them to be a part of the family. These black servitude films and TV shows were often critical darlings. They somehow struck a nerve with audiences who wanted to see these stories told from the black lens. Audiences who grew up with characters like Beulah, Amos and Andy, and caricatures like Uncle Ben and Aunt Jemima. Suddenly those characters had depth and dimension and a sense of personal agency. In 1972, Esther Roll's character Florida from Maude really gave American viewers the first well-rounded depiction of a black servant on television.
Maybe it's something in my private life got me this way. I do have a private life, you know.
The show addressed the power dynamics that arose when a liberal white woman hired a black maid. From day one, Florida and Maude bickered like sisters.
It's my house and mine to keep clean.
And they regularly confided in each other about the ups and downs of their personal lives. The Florida character was so well developed that she earned a spin-off show. Benson's career probably represented the most aspirational storytelling around black servitude. It was already becoming something of a no-no to depict black servants on TV and in the movies, so when Robert Guillaume took the role of the butler in the primetime TV show Soap, he did so knowing that he'd have to play against type. He was playing a servant, but he didn't want to depict him as servile.
Benson, this is all wrong. The avocado and the shrimp should not be separated. The shrimp should go in the avocado.
Here, Tinkerbell, stuff it.
He wanted the Benson character to be someone that black audience members could look up to. In the very first episode, for instance, we see this exchange.
Right with the Benson. What are you cooking?
What does it look like I'm cooking?
Well, it looks like eggs.
Good, then it's eggs.
This was an indication that this was not going to be your father's butler. This character talked back, and he spoke his mind.
Let's make eggs Benedict.
Eggs Benedict? Get out of here.
And the white folks that he worked for didn't seem to mind.
What am I going to do with you? Such a mind of your own.
The idea that a character that started out as the butler on Soap
It's Mr. Tate's favorite.
It ain't mine. I don't like it, so I ain't making it.
could break away and become the star of his own show while ascending to the role of budget manager and eventually lieutenant governor was a bit fantastical.
And that's why I want you to be my new state budget director. Say what?
But it was also the come-up that audiences at the time could root for.
But I don't have any practical experience.
That's exactly what you do have. You brought this mansion in under budget for 2 years.
See, if you just apply yourself and work hard and prove yourself a faithful servant, you too can take part in the American dream.
Well, how can you compare the mansion budget to the state budget?
Well, it's just a matter of size. If you can handle one budget, you can handle the other.
The Florence character on The Jeffersons really turned the black maid trope on its ear. Not only was she working for a black family, she was defiant, sassy, and even rude at times. She was nosy and didn't kowtow to anybody, least of all George.
You told me to get back to work.
Do it someplace else.
I already did it someplace else.
You better get out.
But of course, the fact that she was working for a black family versus a white one changed the power dynamic significantly.
You have to excuse my maid. Every time she opens her mouth, her brain takes a coffee break.
Of course, you don't have that problem, because you ain't got no brain.
Then you had the sauciest of all the modern mammies, Nell Carter in Gimme a Break.
Fish sticks.
That doesn't sound very fancy.
Well, I'll glue them together and we can call it filet of sole.
She was mouthy and bawdy and independent, and yes, she cared for a brood of white children like they were her own. But she wasn't just there to play nursemaid. She had her own life. She dated and had friendships and even career aspirations.
We're professionally known as the doo-wop girls.
Do-wop, do-wop, do-wop.
She was far more interesting than any of the characters around her, and thus she was clearly the star of the show. None of this yes sir, no ma'am stuff. They took their orders from her.
You set 1 foot inside of this room, and tomorrow's headlines are gonna read, "Beautiful black woman stomps white cop into yogurt."
Which is what made the return to form in Driving Miss Daisy so baffling. Suddenly, we were thrust back into a time when all of that back talk would not have been tolerated. Minus 1 or 2 pivotal scenes, Morgan Freeman's character plays it straight and does the job he's been hired to do. And it should have come as no surprise that the industry started hurling awards at that film. It won Best Picture at the Academy Awards in 1990.
Driving Miss Daisy.
Jessica Tandy won the award for Best Actress in a Leading Role. Morgan Freeman and Dan Aykroyd were nominated, and it won Best Adapted Screenplay. By the 1990s, television audiences had pretty much had their fill of black butlers and maids, with one very important exception. But the movies were just getting started. Soon a spate of black servitude films would be released that attempted to redefine the way in which these characters were depicted on film. Karina in 1994, where Whoopi Goldberg played a maid and childcare worker that eventually falls in love with the head of the household, presented a story that had never been told on film before. Here was a black domestic worker that did not keep her place in the social order. She didn't sass her employer, she slept with him. And considering the long history of violation and abuse of black women by their white masters, this was a particularly subversive tale, one where the black domestic wielded her agency and defied the victimization that often accompanied her profession. Now, that exception I mentioned came in the form of a British butler named Geoffrey that blew a lot of the conventions around black domestics out of the water. He was a graduate of Oxford University, he was an Olympic marathoner, and he was in many ways much more refined and genteel than the family for whom he worked.
Hey, look who's here, Benson. Yo, we having a party? Oh, so when we get stupid, right?
He was no sniveling servant. He was a top-notch pro with a silver tongue.
For some of us, that will require very little effort indeed.
While television was busy turning the black servant trope on its ear, the movies seemed to be stuck in a bit of a time loop with it. Movies that depicted black servants who led lives of quiet dignity, like Forrest Whitaker's character in 2013's The Butler or Eddie Murphy's Mr. Church from 2016, seemed to thrive in the wake of the success of The Help, which was released to critical acclaim in 2011. Which begs the question, why were these movies always so critically acclaimed? Were they really as groundbreaking and monumental as they were touted to be? Or does Hollywood just enjoy seeing black folks playing servants? Well, the answer in my estimation is not straightforward. The Motion Picture Academy tends to reward restraint. If you look at some of the most highly celebrated films according to the Academy, restraint is the pinnacle of dramatic achievement. Think Colin Firth in The King's Speech.
You have no idea who I have breathing down my neck.
Meryl Streep in The Iron Lady, or Tom Hanks in Philadelphia.
Correct, I was sabotaged.
When you begin to show black characters who are dealing with some sort of hardship, who have to manage their emotions and their actions in the face of intense opposition,
I'm gonna have to be paid the same as a white help, or I'm gonna have to move on.
You've laid the groundwork for just the kind of performance that the industry values, outside of scenery chewing.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
But as black actors are now being given opportunities to play more emotionally complex characters with motivations that go beyond their ability to maintain quiet dignity in the face of extreme difficulty, we're slowly starting to see more varied performances be rewarded by the Academy. Having the good fortune to be able to leave all these spicy butlers and maids behind once and for all is a luxury that our ancestors could only have dreamt of. But watching those actors walk their path with dignity while laying the groundwork for the current crop of talented black actors is a lesson that we'll continue to glean from for many years to come. You can support The Breakdown by picking up our swag at the link in the description.